Welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm Stacey Sims, and this is a presentation that I did at PodFest Masterclass, and I got such an interesting reaction to it that I wanted to bring it to you and do it again with additional information. So let me show you what I want to do here. Let's see, full screen. There we go. All right, so sell your show without selling your soul. This is all about ethics of successful podcast advertising. And what I'm going to do tonight is take this presentation and kind of add it into another presentation that I've done all about podcast monetization. So in the beginning of this, I'm actually going to take you through what I think is really important in terms of ethics of podcast sales. And then we're going to talk about how to do more sales. And hopefully these two together will give you a really good picture of how to succeed with your show. But this is the first time, just full disclosure, and you'll see I'm really big on disclosures, that I am doing these two presentations kind of together. So I'm curious to see what you think afterwards. I'm going to send out a survey probably and just see what you liked and what goes together well. So let me tell you a little bit about me first, if you are not familiar. I'm the host of Diabetes Connections, which is the podcast that I started 6 years ago next week. June of 2015 is when I started Diabetes Connections. Before that, I spent 20 years in local television and radio news. I was mostly a reporter and anchor in local television. And then the last 10 years of my full-time professional career working for somebody else, I spent at News Talk 1110 WBT, which is the big news talk here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live. I started my podcast, as I said, in 2015. And for the first 6 months, I was finding my way, trying to figure out what to do. And then I got my first sponsors. So 6 months after I launched is when I started running commercials in my show. And my show I'll talk about this in the part of the presentation about monetization. My show is paid for by sponsorships and advertising agreements. I don't do Patreon. I don't do merchandise. Those are not things that I can speak about with any expertise. These are just some fun pictures I like to share because podcasting is so fun and so rewarding. And I'm really, really lucky because I get to meet my audience quite a bit. So on the top left, this is me at a diabetes conference. Before COVID, I went to several of these a year, and looks like we're starting up again, so I'm very excited. They brought me in, this was in California, to basically be a radio station at this conference. And they wanted me to do interviews and capture some audio about people enjoying being there and why. So that was great. That's a CEO of one of the diabetes companies. The top right is me. I wish I had a picture of the girl. I'll have to change that out. She's one of these 8, 9, 10-year-olds who's on the Food Network baking show championships. And she lives with type 1. So it's fun to get out on the road and interview people. And then the bottom two pictures go together. This is a cycling group. This is actually, they're not really a formal cycling group, but they are people with type 1 diabetes who decided to raise money and awareness by biking from New York to California a few years ago. And I partnered with the group Beyond Type 1. I reached out to them and said, hey, you guys should come on the show regularly throughout the summer. We can check in on your progress. And you should pay me because it'll be a sponsored segment. And they did. But it turned out to be such a fun experience. And it's the only, still, a bunch of interviews I've ever done while the other people were in a hot tub. So I'm on the left here in my home studio. You can see I used to use the Yeti. I don't anymore. And they're in their hot tub. So we had a really good time passing the phone around. Podcasting's great. So let's talk about ethics. Now we're going to go through what I mean by that. So we want to talk about your values. We want to talk about category exclusivity, disclosures, ads versus show content, and asking guests to pay. That one always comes up. I should also say right now, and I'm going to stop the screen share for just a quick moment. I am going to have a little bit of trouble going back and forth and looking at the chat, but I promise I will check here and there. So if you have any questions, there will be time for Q&A or comments. I will definitely check it out and try to get in there and see what I can do, but it's going to be a little difficult the way I'm doing it tonight. So, all right, so let's start with your listeners. Everything that I talk about, even when I talk about monetizing your show, is all about putting your listener first. I'm very fortunate because I get to meet my listeners, but that also keeps me accountable. It's a little different if you know you're going to see the people that you are serving. And that's what you're doing with your show, right? You're serving your listener. So this is another diabetes conference. This is the largest diabetes family conference in the world. It's held every year in July. It's going to look a little different this year, obviously. But this is me over here in the orange. I do a game show at this conference every year. You've heard of NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I do Wait, Wait, Don't Poke Me. And it's a diabetes game show, and we have a lot of fun. But I show this picture because these are all listeners or potential listeners. And it really helps me when I say, put your listener first. We'll get into a little bit more about how to do that. But, some things are quite obvious, right? Be honest with your listener. Think about how long your show should be, right? Do you have a commuter audience? Do you have a dog walking audience? Do you have an audience that just wants the show to be long enough, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, to get the information that they need? If you have a 5-hour podcast that holds an audience, please let me know. But when you think about your listener, everything else kind of falls into place naturally. So I show this because one of the nicest things that has helped me is knowing my audience and actually having to meet them. All right, so you want to identify your values. How do you do this? I don't think that many of us sit around in podcasting and think, what's important to me in terms of when I accept advertisers, what values am I going to look for in them? And I really suggest that you sit down and make a list. This can be very difficult because how many times do we even do this in life, right? I mean, Google was famous for saying, don't be evil. It's kind of helpful, but kind of not. So sometimes it's easier to decide who you don't want. If you're thinking about your niche, your subject matter, your audience, what are some things that are very difficult for them? I'll tell you right now, in my community in diabetes, and my show it's not for all types of diabetes. We used to focus primarily on type 1, which used to be called juvenile diabetes. I'm not going to explain too much about that here. But now I say we have a focus on people who use insulin, because I found that many other people with different types of diabetes were listening, but the common bond was everybody who needed insulin. And right now, there's so many issues in the US about access to insulin, right? About insulin pricing. And so deciding whether or not to take money from insulin makers is a bit of a hot potato in the community. So that's a value, right? Do you want to take money from a company with whom you have a real disagreement in terms of values? And you may learn this case by case. You may learn this by accepting money from a sponsor that you later find out that's not who I want to be associated with. But write this stuff down. You never have to show it to anybody. It's for you. I'm big on doing that for a lot of reasons. It is okay to say no. I should move this little box. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I love her little face, like she just ate a lemon. If it doesn't align with your values, if you don't like the product, what if you hate the product that these people want you to talk about? If you don't like the people, right? That happens sometimes too. Or your audience tells you that they're not comfortable with what you're doing. There are all sorts of great reasons to say no to podcast sponsorship to particular companies. Sometimes you learn this by making the mistakes and just saying, oh, well, the money's good, or I really want to get started. I just want this one sponsor. But you will figure it out. I will tell you a quick story. It's tough to say no when you don't like the product, because then you actually may have to tell them that you don't like the product. Sometimes a white lie is a nice thing. I mean, ethically, I'm not against that necessarily. I did have to tell a company last year that I didn't like them. It was a frozen food, like already prepared and you just heat it up kind of thing, not a HelloFresh type of situation where you actually prepare. This was take it out of the freezer, put it in the microwave. It was not, my face looked like hers. It was not very good. And I decided to tell them because I thought it was that bad. And this was a national company. So I just said, was not to my taste. And I'll if you change your product, let me know. I haven't heard from them. All right. This is one of the big things that you really need to know. Category exclusivity. This is such a handy term. And I come from talk radio, where they make, most of their money in live reads. So I thought everybody in podcasting understood this, but come to find out, this is a concept, very simple, but not a lot of people think about. So category exclusivity simply means one advertiser per category. I can only have one blood sugar meter person on my show. I'm not going to have competing blood. I'm not going to, as Stacey Sims, I'm not going to endorse this blood sugar meter is great, but by the way, this one's great too, right? You just sound kind of like a shill. You just sound like a sleazeball. So one advertiser per category. It adds legitimacy. It builds trust, right? This is the one. These are my people. This is my company. These are the folks that believe in me and I believe in them. It also helps identify and approach sponsors because you realize that your show can have categories. And this isn't just for something as specialized as diabetes. Mattresses, right? Website builders. Think of all of the podcast cliche commercials. They're all in their own category. And if you can really break it down in your own niche into what categories might work, it's very, very helpful. And sponsors know this language. The marketing departments are used to dealing with traditional media in these ways. So it makes you sound a lot more professional, and they love it. And if they haven't thought of it yet, if they aren't experienced with it and you come at them with it, they're very impressed, I have found. Oh, I offer category exclusivity. Oh, really? How nice. And also, when your sponsors come back, because whatever length of contract you give them, and I will talk about that a little bit later on, 3 months, 6 months, a year, when it's time to renew, you want to give your returning sponsors the right of first refusal in their category. And then if they don't come back, you give them a deadline, you move on within the category. Category exclusivity is a nice one. Disclose. I mentioned this earlier. Disclose. You want to have a disclaimer on your website. You want to have a disclaimer in the show. You want audio cues, and you want to be audibly honest. Now, a disclaimer and disclosing. I think this means different things to different people, depending on your niche, right? For me, I need a medical disclaimer. I am not a doctor. Or if I were a doctor, I am not giving you medical advice. You are not my patient. A lot of shows have to have some kind of disclaimer like that. Okay, so this is the disclosure I have on my website. And it is a 3-parter. So guests are not compensated. Oh, first we do the medical disclaimer, right? Blah, blah, blah. It's not a medical advice. Then we do guests are not compensated, because that's not how my show rolls. I will occasionally accept product or samples, and I will disclose when doing so. Sponsorship is available and will be clearly indicated when accepted. Sponsors will not dictate content or review shows prior to air. And then editing, modification, or redistribution is not allowed without written permission. These are all really important in their separate ways, and it doesn't have to be fancy and clean like this. You can just, write it out for whatever your show needs. But these are all ways to say to your listener and to your sponsors, I am upfront, I am honest. This is what I'm all about. So you also want, in addition to those disclaimers and disclosures on your website, audio cues. I think there are a lot of podcasters who take the conversational piece of advertising just a little bit too far, right? You always hear, you don't want people skipping your ads, and you don't want people, tuning out your ads. You have to make it super conversational. And that's true, but you also have to make it clear that it's an ad. And that can be as easy as, hey, we'll be right back. But first, I like to do a tease. So I come in the middle of my very first spot that comes in my show. I say, interview with my fabulous guest is up next. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by, and then I go into the ad. Coming out of the ad, I have a little music cue. So, okay, end of ad, back to content. My second ad comes in the middle of my interview. And what I usually do is at the end of a question, right? So tell me about how you swam to the UK, with shark-infested waters. And then we'll be right back. And I put that in there. So hopefully they'll stay because they want to know the answer to the question. And again, out of that ad, I put a music cue. It's just super important to make sure that your listener knows what is paid content and what is not. And that's why I say to be audibly honest and open, because chances are really good that 99% of people never read the disclaimer that I just showed you. Who on earth has gone to my website and really looked at that and found it? Probably very, very, very few of my listeners, but they know every show because they can hear what I'm doing. All right, so see, we went all around the horn and back. When guests pay, can you do this? I think it depends on the show. And my answer is yes, I think you can do this. So should your guests pay to be on your show? The should part is really up to you. If you're doing a news show like I do, no way, can't happen. Once guests are paying, once people are paying for content, then you are no longer a news program. But if a guest wants to pay for content, you need to let your audience know. And you need to let them know in some way, shape, or form that works for you. So this might be an announcement at the top of the show, right? Hey, diabetes, well, I shouldn't say it like that because I don't want to give the wrong idea. The Stacey Sims Show. We're proud to welcome guests who are also our sponsors, or paid paid appearances on the Stacey Sims show are made possible by blah, whatever. But you have to make sure to say it somehow. You don't have to say, hey, my guest's paid to be here. You can couch it in nice terms like, sponsorship or things like that. Or if you want to be, you can put at the end of the show as long as it's transparent, but you have to say something to make sure that people understand that money has changed hands. Because I can't imagine listening to a show, and this happens, right? You have these like entrepreneur shows or business shows where people are paying to be on it and they don't disclose. And then 2 years in, you find out and you're thinking back now, was everything I heard on this show garbage? Is it all sleazy? And chances are no. I mean, chances are good that there was good information. These were fun guests. I mean, I don't think that just because a guest pays, it makes everything suspect, but it certainly changes, especially when they don't disclose it. So find a way to make it clear what's going on. And then you got to make it clear back to the guest. What are they actually paying for? Are they just paying to be on the show? Are they paying for a non-edited copy of the podcast before it airs? Are they paying for edits? Do they get to dictate exactly how the show comes out? You need to make all of these things clear, because if I were paying to be a guest on a show and the host didn't make it clear, I would want that. I'd want that whole show so I could make myself sound fabulous. I would want to edit it myself and send it back. So just be clear. So we hear a lot in podcasting about know, like, and trust. That's why people want to pay money to advertise on your show, because your audience knows and likes and trusts you. Well, trust, and I put this photo in, you get one shot at trust. This guy, if he can't be trusted, he's not making another trip, right? This isn't ending well. You can always get people to know you better. You can always win them back to like you. You have a really hard time regaining people's trust. So I think it's, as we talk about podcasting and we look at that equation, I also think it's really important for podcasting to kind of grow up a little bit. And if we want to be taken serious as a medium, and I think it's a fabulous medium, it's my favorite, it needs to grow up and take itself seriously. So that doesn't mean we can't have fun, we can't have funny shows and all that good stuff, but that trust piece, I don't think is talked about enough, especially when money is changing hands. All right, so a couple of quick pitfalls. Oh, I learned these the hard way. Free product is never free. Be very, very careful about accepting free stuff. A couple of examples. When I was in radio, we used to get free things all the time. Somebody would say, we're doing a home improvement project and we want to give you this for free in your home. Well, then they'd go out of business 6 months later and I'm stuck with this thing. And that happened to me twice. We got an air filtration system that somebody put in. They went out of business. We got some kind of wackadoo heating system. It wasn't like a big hot water heater. It was just for your sink. And they put it under one sink in my house and then they disappeared. And I had to hire, in both cases, I had to hire people to get that crap out of my house. So I had a new rule. I worked in radio for 10 years. And my rule was by year 3 or 4, if I can't physically lift it and remove it from my house myself, it is not going in, especially not for free. I would pay for things if I thought I wanted them. Years ago when everybody was getting LASIK and everybody on your local radio station started endorsing LASIK, they were all getting it for free. And I refused. I got it, and it's the greatest. I love it. Thank you, Dr. Mosiani at Providence Eye and Laser Specialists in Charlotte. But I paid him because I said to myself, what if something goes wrong? What am I going to do if something goes wrong with my eyeballs? You can't return those. So be careful. On my show now, I don't accept free product. My son has type 1 diabetes. I don't accept free product for him because this kind of stuff goes on his body. And once again, if something goes wrong, I want to make sure that I have recourse. And I also don't want him to feel obligated to use it. It would be different if it were me. You want to be careful about how ads are structured. You want to make sure that you are, again, this kind of goes into what I was talking about earlier, about making sure they're not too conversational, right? I mean, only because you want to make sure that they are obviously an ad. Doesn't mean they can't be fun. It doesn't mean they can't be very conversational, but you want to make sure that they are not part of the content of your show. Disclosure comes in there again. And overexposure. This happens a lot on social media campaigns. I don't do as much, but I'm doing more. And I'm shocked at how many times a company will approach me and say, okay, we want to do it for this week. And then I ask them, okay, how many other influencers are in the ad campaign? and there's like 6 or 7. Well, people aren't stupid. If 6 or 7 influencers in the same niche start putting out the same ad with the same copy, with the same pictures in the same week, I mean, it looks ridiculous. So I always, well, I shouldn't say always because I just started doing this, but what I like to do is ask, can I alter the copy? Can I alter the photos? And can I go first? Can I at least be in the beginning of the week? And they usually say post whenever you want. And then I go immediately the first day with a personal photo, something completely different from the graphics they've sent, different copy. Because otherwise, if everybody in your niche starts showing up with the same ad that week, you look like, everybody looks like they've just been bought. And most of the time, the product is great, right? We want to get the message out. That's what we're here to help with. But you want to do it well. All right, legal stuff, get everything in writing. Get everything in writing. I'm always amazed how so many people think it'll be fine. It's not fine. Get it in writing. Sponsor may provide a contract. They may make you a vendor. I work with some large pharmaceutical companies. I have become an independent contractor for them. They make you jump through a bajillion hoops. It can take forever to get paid, but sometimes you have to do it that way. Just make sure that it is in writing. These are good times to call in a lawyer. It really does help, and do not rely on verbal agreements. I am not selling my course tonight. If you're interested, I have we're going to talk about that kind of a little bit when we do the monetization segment. I do have a course, and I only mention that because I have a legal document for you in there that you can use for sponsorship. So down the road, I'm opening that up again in a couple of weeks, probably. If that's something you're interested in, just let me know. I don't know. We can work it out. But it's really important to have that stuff in writing. And verbal agreements are nice, but they're not worth anything. Again, put your listener first. And this picture makes me laugh. It's one of my absolute favorites. I do at that same conference, that family diabetes conference, it's at Disney World. And one of the things I started doing a couple of years ago, they have a big charity auction. And I found out, have you ever done the fireworks cruises at Disney? I don't know if they're doing them anymore because of COVID, but when they start up again, they are $300. It is the best money I've ever spent on an event. I build a lot when I make my sponsors pay for stuff. I build travel and I build these kinds of things into it. So I'm not really paying for it, but I give it away as a prize. And then I take 10 people out on the boat. And when they get in the boat, most of them already listen, but those who don't, everybody's got to put the show on their phone. And then we take pictures and then we do the fireworks cruise. So that's why I'm laughing, because it is kind of obnoxious to make them all do that. But everybody laughs and has a good time. And then I have fantastic photos and we have a really nice time going around the lake. It's the best way to see fireworks at Disney. Well, some people disagree. Some people have very strong feelings about this. It's the best way for me because the crowds make me crazy even before COVID. It's a little too much, but it's not exactly the best way to see all the details about the fireworks. So there's more information at staceysims.com. We're going to take that down right now because I'm not selling anything, but you can go to staceysims.com if you haven't already been there. And I know many of you have. There's a quiz that you can take to see if you're ready for podcast monetization. There's some other information there. I have a blog post I wrote recently about what podcasters can learn from Zack Snyder's The Justice League. So listen, I'm going to segue into the monetization portion of the evening's activities. Does anybody have any questions about ethics before I carry on chatting here? All right, I know you all want to know how to make money on your shows. We should have done the money first and then the ethics. Maybe that's the way to do it. Let you practice the sleazeball part before we go there. All right, let me get here. We have a question. Have you ever had a situation where your guest records the show without your consent? How do you handle that? Dana, what a great question. Before I answer it, I don't know if you can put this as a follow-up or you can put it in the chat. Did this happen to you? Because I will tell you what I would say. This is a really interesting question. You had it happen to you. Okay, so the question then becomes, there's a couple of legalese things to that first. I think the first question is, do you live in a state that allows one-party recordings? Now, I don't know for podcast and rebroadcast, but there are many states that in the United States where one-party consent is all that is needed to record anything. And If that's the case, then the other party is, very much entitled to do that. If the guest is recording the show kind of for their own record, I have no problem with that. You're in Georgia. I'm not sure about Georgia either. I know in North Carolina, it's okay. If the guest is recording it with intent to rebroadcast on their own, I mean, it's all ethical gray areas, right? Why are they recording it? I record everything I do. I record all the interviews that I do. I don't disclose to the host because I'm not planning on rebroadcasting them. I record them to protect myself. Not that anybody cares. I mean, I'm only talking about diabetes or podcasting, but I like the idea of having a recording of what I'm saying. I've also gotten into the habit of, I record conference calls. That started by accident because I had a system for a while that as soon as I entered my, it was Skype, as soon as I was on Skype, MP3 Skype call would fire. And that was even on conference calls. So I was recording everything. And it actually came in really handy because I was on a call with Eli Lilly Diabetes once, and we had a great opportunity to ask them about lowering the price of insulin, and it turned into a podcast episode. However, I disclosed that at that point, I said, look, I'm recording the call before I ask you this, can I do that? And that I think is okay. I would say if you've been recorded without knowing it and you're not sure of the intent of the person, I would flat out ask them. I'm not sure how you became aware that you were recorded, but if you're not sure of the purpose, I would say, hey, listen, I found that you were recording me. I'd like to know why. I don't necessarily have an issue with it, but it's really important to me to understand what went on. And if there is an issue there and it is a two-party consent state, and you can Google that up, then you have a case to argue with them. But if not, I'd like to know what they plan on doing with it, right? Are they releasing it? Are they there for their own protection? And then going forward, you may want to say to your guests, I have a whole guest form. I have a whole thing that I put out for guests that says, here's how to record, please wear headphones, please do this, please do that. And here's the legal form, by the way, that I need you to sign before you come on. You may want to add that. And one of the things you might say is, you are allowed to record for your own records, but you are not allowed to rebroadcast, or you're not allowed to record at all. You do not have my consent, depending on what state you're in, or that kind of thing. Really interesting question, though. I'm going to go ahead and try to find the rest of it. Let's see if I can fire up the other presentation and share the screen again. That was really interesting. Good question. See, I think that with podcasting being so new, even though we are getting old now, there's all of these questions. All right, so let's talk money. I'm going to try to do this in about 15 minutes and then see if you have any more questions, because I know you guys are going to have some money questions. All right, sponsors don't want you, they want your audience. Yes, so this is, I don't want to reopen my PDFs, leave me alone. No. This is the key to selling your show. Sponsors do not care how great you are, how funny you are, so much about your subject. They want to know what your audience likes. Who's in your audience? What do they want? It's all about your audience and knowing them. This is the key to podcast sponsorship. So who's listening? You need to know all about them. Some people call them avatars. I don't like that word. I feel like an avatar is just, who am I, right? It's like me, Stacey. And my listener is not me. I mean, I'm part of the diabetes community, but the show cannot be just for me. I need to make sure I understand who my listener is. In radio, we call them P1s, right? Your primary listener, or your super listener. And that's a little bit different. Your super listener is that person that is always there. If you're going to do a Facebook Live, if you're going to have an event, if you're going to show up, there's always a couple of people, they are there for you, and you need to give them a lot of love. And you need to really make sure that they understand that they're important to you, because they will help you spread the word. So whatever you call them, you need to know who's listening. How do you do that? If you haven't done it already, and it's not super obvious who your audience is, I mean, even for me, right, I say people who use insulin. What does that mean? Who are they? You got to dial down to it and find these things out. So you can use your hosting service like Libsyn or Blueberry or Buzzsprout. Many of these services will give you a very, very easy survey to go through and find out these basic bits about your audience. You can even make a Google survey. It's not that hard to do. But you need to know for advertising, gender, age, income, education, geography, anything else that makes sense for your niche. I always ask, like, what diabetes technology do you use? My audience uses insulin pumps to a much greater degree than the average population of people with diabetes. They are much more tech savvy. That's just podcasting, but you need to know. Oh, and if you're doing a survey, again, ethics, make sure the information is blinded and stays anonymous. So you have to be very careful because quite often the email will be associated with the survey, but most surveys will have a way for you to get around that. So just make sure that you're careful and you're not like looking up, oh, Stacey took the survey. What did she say about me? That's not ethical. Make a plan. Remember how I told you to write stuff down earlier? Write stuff down again. And this is just for you, but you need a business plan. We're going to go through pricing. I'm going to help you out with that. Packaging. How are you going to put your ads together? What does your ad package look like? It's not just, hey, do you want to advertise on my show? Because they're going to come back and say, well, what kind of package do you offer? You need to think about that. What's the length of your ad buy? Are you just thinking about next week's show, or are you really putting together a business plan? 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And what's your timeline? And by that, I mean, right now we're at the end of May. So if you're selling ads right now, when are they going to start running? And what's your goal? You're probably not going to sell an ad tomorrow. So maybe your ad buy, your goal is end of July. And if you sell by the end of July, you're going to start those ads in September. Things like that. You just need to have your timeline in place so that you can better articulate it. If you've got somebody who wants to be on next week, fabulous. You can always adjust. And then a list of potential sponsors. This can be a daydream. This can be a reach. This can be, things you think is very possible, things you think are very possible, but you need to make a list. Podcast ad pricing. I feel very differently about this than many other people. I think that we fool around with podcast ad pricing. And as I said, it's time for this industry to grow up. So let's grow up together, shall we? I think a $100 minimum per episode is extremely reasonable. If you want to charge less, think about it for a minute. And we're going to get to CPM and blah, blah, blah. If you're charging less per episode, you probably haven't thought through or experienced the amount of work it takes to not only obtain a sponsor, but to keep a sponsor. I almost knocked my computer off because I got so excited about this and I talked with my hands. Consider if you start with 100, and some of you are probably like, that's too low. Wonderful. Consider raising the price. Let them tell you no. I started out my podcast sponsorship 6 years ago with a very low price, I thought, but a reasonable price. It was more than $100 per episode. And I kept raising it. And then 2 years ago, I got my first no. And they didn't even leave the show. They just went to a lower sponsorship tier. Yes, there were many companies who said this is too expensive for us, but I was able to fill the show. And of my returning sponsors, so far, only the one has dropped down. So we don't have time to go into too much more detail, but this is, to me, the way to do it. A small but very hard to reach audience like mine, right? People who use insulin, people with type 1 diabetes, is very, very valuable. I mean, there's a million things you can think of that would be very niche audience that aren't my show. I'm sure if you've been in podcasting for long enough, you've probably heard these types of shows. World War II vets who enjoy classic cars. Women who like certain movies or who travel to certain areas, right? So you can set your own price if you understand your industry and it is very niche. I joke all the time that the best show for podcasts would be like, something for anesthesiologists because they make the most money, right? It's like the most valuable audience you can get. If you're not so niche, you need to consider, this is all about download numbers, sorry. So your small but hard to reach audience, if you have 100 anesthesiologists, you're good to go. You don't need a lot of downloads for that audience. If you're not so niche though, you need about 1,000 downloads per episode after 4 to 5 weeks. And for a much more general sponsorship opportunity, you're selling to those mattress companies, those prepared foods companies, you need 5,000 downloads approximately. You can also offer extras and add-ons. Do you have room on your website? I put the logos on the website. I put the logos in the show notes now. Newsletter, social media, right? Speaking, blogging, writing, wherever you already have a presence, you can also offer your sponsors a spot there in addition to your podcast. I offer my sponsors, even during COVID, I go to events, right? I'm on Zoom. But if I'm speaking at a diabetes event, everybody who sponsors my podcast, they get a spot with me when I travel. So in real travel, that means I'm standing at a podium saying, hey, it's so great to be here. Before I start, I really want to say a big thank you to Dexcom. Do you guys know about Dexcom? Well, let me tell you a little bit about them. They're standing in the back if you have any questions. Thank you so much. They pay for the commercials on my show and they make it possible for me to be here. So thank you. That kind of thing. And I do that on Zoom too, because even though they're not paying for my travel or anything like that, they're still getting that as part of the show package. So anything you can add on, be creative, sell it. What if I'm just starting out? I really think it's important if you're just starting out to take a deep breath. Most shows are not going to sell sponsorship before they launch. Some will. And most shows aren't going to sell sponsorship within the first 3 months. You need to get your feet under you. You need to understand your show and you need to understand your audience. And you need to understand how much work you want to put in. If you start out with the intention of making money and you get 3 weeks in and realize, this is fun, but I don't want to do the additional work, that's fine. You don't have to make money in podcasting. You can just have a good time and hang out with your friends and chit chat and do good stuff. But it's a serious business once you start making money, because don't forget, and I think I have a slide here coming up on legalities and stuff. You're now talking about taxes and accounting and filing. And this is a lot of work, which is why it should be more than $100 per show. I do have a bunch of ethical stuff here. So I'm going to go back because we already went through the ethics. Let me just take a quick peek and make sure I'm not missing something. Yeah. Okay. So I'm in the regular presentation. This is where I tell you about my course again. But I do have a question. How do you figure out who your subscribers are? I have a YouTube channel with 1,000 subscribers. I don't know how to reach out to them. Fantastic question. It is so hard to figure out subscribers because you don't get that information. And that's actually something that podcasting is struggling with right now in terms of privacy. I will answer that question, but little privacy bit here. I think it's a very good thing that we don't know more about our subscribers. We have very little privacy left in this world, and I don't necessarily want podcast hosts to know everything about me and to be able to track me. Some podcast services do make that happen. If you are familiar at all with Rob Walsh of Libsyn, he hosts a podcast called The Feed. He is launching a new podcast, I believe, about privacy issues, because this is a big soapbox issue for him. He feels that privacy in podcasting is paramount. That's a lot of P's. But it is difficult, and I think it should be. So to answer that question, you need to start some kind of email list if you can. You're not going to really find out enough about your subscribers through YouTube. I'm not that familiar with how much information YouTube gives you about people. I'm assuming that they don't just have a way to press a button, right, and get all the information. I'm thinking of like Apple Podcasts. If you have subscribers or followers now on different podcast platforms, you can't just say, well, who are these people? So what I did in the very beginning it was probably a year in before I started an email list. But very traditional way to do that is to offer something, right? You're going to offer a lead magnet, or you could just have a contest and do a $25 Amazon gift card. And you could fold this into your survey too. When I do a survey, I always offer a prize like that. So you have to give people a reason to give you their email address. But if you're on YouTube and you have all the subscribers, the next couple of times you're posting on YouTube, you could say, hey, I'm starting a newsletter. If you want to sign up, here's how. And when you do, you get this. And it doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be a contest. I offered my latest lead magnet, and I always hate saying that. It sounds so silly, but it's a marketing thing. I have an ebook that I put together. That was a lot of work. I put that together from transcripts a couple of years ago when transcripts were much more difficult. Now I actually have a transcription for almost every show. But the ebook is popular. And I put that together on certain subjects for the show. I'm about to put one together for summer, like it's themed about summer issues. I had one that was about back to school. So whatever your niche is and whatever your show's about, you could put a lead magnet together that is of interest to your people, a common question they have, 5 ways to solve your problem or whatever, or the 5 movies we like the best this time of year, or whatever your show's about, and try to get them to subscribe to your newsletter. That gives you a couple of different ways to keep track of. You won't get all your listeners, right? It won't be a perfect overlap, but it will give you the chance to understand more about who's watching and listening. And it'll also give you a way to contact these people. Like, what if YouTube pulls the plug on you tomorrow? You have no way to reach those people. So this way you have your own platform, you have the email addresses, and it's very, very helpful. Those people are very loyal. Like I said, I've been working on my email list for a very long time. I sent a survey out earlier this year and I got an amazing response because those people have heard from me every single week for 5 years. And it's not just, here's what my show is about. I usually put in little tidbits or talk about my personal life a little bit, a friend of mine says, you have to nurture your email people. You have to nurture them. So I'm not like the best nurturer, but I do what I can. All right. I'm glad that helped, Gail, because it's a tough one. I'd like to know more about my people too, but ethically you really can't. The CPM thing, I know I talk about that like a lot of people understand exactly what we're talking about. I just want to mention CPM real quick, just in case. So CPM is cost per mille, which is a fancy way of saying thousand. And every media company sells on CPM. It's not just podcasting, but the way it's priced is very different. So basically, when you hear somebody say, a CPM of $25, that means if you reach 1,000 listeners, they pay $25. Cost per mille is 25. And I think that, to me, it's just too low and it's too much work. And I know people are surprised that I don't add up my listeners and then, send it to the companies and then get a check back. But most of them don't want to do that either. They want to know who you're reaching. What's nice, I think, for them is when they sign the contract with me, this is the amount of listeners I have. If those listeners go up, they're not paying me anymore. They're locked in. So it's kind of a nice deal for them. Of course, if my listenership goes down, which it hasn't, thankfully, but it could happen, right? But they're still paying the same amount. I also work with medical companies, most of which I'm this much of their yearly budget. I mean, can you get small? I'm this much of their yearly budget. And they want to pay me at the beginning of the year for the whole year. So when I work with smaller companies and they want to do 3 months or 6 months, it's a little bit different. But to me, CPM is a fine way to look at things. But my CPM and your CPM should be higher than the industry standard. The industry standard stinks. And I really think that it's kind of incumbent on all of us to ask for more. Our audiences are worth more, and our work is worth more. So, there are some shows with CPMs of $1,000 a show. They just don't sell it that way. It doesn't sound the same. But when you break it down, that's what you get. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. But again, when you're taking in any kind of money, the ethics, I think, get more, I don't know if more important is the right way to say it, but they should be focused on, because there's more of a chance, right, once money is involved, that people are going to get greedy, people are going to get impatient, and wacky things are going to happen. So that's why, I appreciate you being here, because the ethical presentation, it's the first time I've seen anybody really talk about this. When I was accepted at PodFest, they said they'd never had a presentation that focused on it. And I don't think it's because people are trying to rip each other off. I mean, I think everybody in podcasting, the vast majority of people in podcasting are here because we're passionate about what we're talking about. We're excited about presenting it via audio. We want to make a difference. We want to help people. We want to have a voice. And I think we're also very helpful for the most part. And we're talking mostly about independent podcasters here, right? To be honest, we want to help one another. And we want to elevate the community, even if we don't put it in those terms, right? I mean, it sounds kind of lofty, but that's been my experience in podcasting, which has been a lucky one. But I think as more time has gone on, for me, I've been surprised that the disclosures and the disclaimers haven't come more naturally to people. I've been frustrated when I've listened to certain shows and they're not paying attention to how their ads sound. I listen to a lot of shows, they're the professional shows, where the host will literally be talking about some subject in the middle of the sentence. The ad comes crashing in. And it's terrible production. I mean, that's not an ethically bad thing necessarily, but it shows that they're not paying attention to how they sound, to how they're coming across, to what impression they're making. And it makes me wonder, do they have any idea what ads are running in their show? You know, this dynamic advertising is a big thing right now, and everybody wants to be able to sell their back catalog. And that's a great thing if you pay attention to it. But if you're just throwing ads into your show to cash a check, you're forgetting that your listener actually listens to the show and they might be taken aback or turned off by the ad. And that means that it comes to you. They're going to be turned off by you. And you only get that one chance at trust. So I do think these are really important issues. I do think that they're worth thinking about. Again, that little list that you need to make if you want to decide, okay, I don't really want to work with this advertiser. I don't really want to go with that advertiser. And, you know, most of us aren't in podcasting because we're using this to feed our families, right? I mean, a lot of times we have to compromise in real life to take a job, to get that health insurance. I understand that. I'm not trying to preach and be high and mighty about this, but 9 times out of 10, or even more than that, 99 times out of 100 for independent podcasters, we don't start out saying, this is my living, right? This is something we're doing on the side. This is a hobby. This is something I'd like to try. And if that's the case, it makes it just a little bit easier, I think, to make sure you start out with these principles in your pocket. So before I wrap it up, we only have about 5 more minutes, and I really appreciate you all being here. Somebody has their hand up, and I can't seem to call on you. Oh, it's Gail. Was that another question for you? Or was that your question that you asked? I can never tell in Zoom. Obviously, and I'm so sorry for those interruptions earlier. I'm glad we got back on track. Gail says, no, she's set. Okay, fabulous. Any other questions for me? All right, so if not, I will not give you the hard sell, but I will tell you, if you go to staceysims.com, and I will put that in the chat. Oh, wait, this is going to go to me. That is all panelists and attendees. Okay, that has the quiz, if you haven't taken it already, to find out if your show is ready for sponsors. And it is a lead magnet, so it will lead you to my email list. Nothing sneaky there. You don't have to put your email in if you don't want to, but if you want to take the quiz, I believe it's also got a webinar that I did in the past that you can watch, and just some other little podcasting tidbits here and there. I'm still kind of figuring out how much I want to focus on coaching. Gail was asking if I do private sessions. I do sometimes. I have done in the past. At the moment, I'm gearing up to make an announcement. I'm working with a podcasting group. So I'll be talking about that if you follow me on social media or on staceysims.com probably next week. So I don't know how much time I'm going to have for one-on-one coaching, but you can contact me through the website. Go ahead and do that, Gail, and we'll see what we can set something up and figure it out. If anyone here is interested in buying the course is all about Get Paid to Podcast, and it is a deep dive into some of the issues I talked about in that part of the presentation, including how to do a pitch, how to do a presentation, how to find sponsors, how to set your packages, all of that. It's a video course that takes you step by step and gives you the legal forms too. So I can open that up. It's not open right now. But if you're interested in that, let me know. You can tell I'm a terrible salesperson, but I'm happy to do that. So you can contact me as well. That's a paid course. That's $199 for all of those hours of videos and all the documents that you get as well. And I think it's worth it, because I think a lawyer would cost you more than $200. And my legal counsel went ahead and made up all the contracts for us. So you can peruse that, and I can certainly put that link. What I will do is I will send a follow-up. Let's make this easy. I'll send a follow-up email tomorrow with the recorded webinar, with a link to the course, and there is a preview on the course, so you can kind of see if you want to do that. And Gail, I'll also put a little note in there about coaching. I'll mull that over and let everybody know. But I think we're good. Thank you so much. I'll also, as I said, probably down the road, send you all a little bit of a survey about what you thought, minus the technical issues, about tonight's presentation, and if the ethical part was as valuable as the Get Paid to Podcast part, because to me, they go hand in hand in hand. But thanks again. I'm so glad to see everybody here. Have a great night, and I hope you all stay in touch. Have a great night.